Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very excited to see that we still have some eager and awake faces here. It's been a long day, but we'll try to make this brief, and then hopefully, if you have any more questions, we can talk about them afterwards. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about where I'm coming from. I just arrived last night from Bogota, Colombia. It's a little bit far away from here, and certainly thinking about what are some of the lessons that I could share with you has been quite a bit of a challenge because we've had some excellent panelists here sharing their experiences. So Fundación Capital is an organization that works throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. We work with 10 different countries, and we act sort of as a bridge between the work that's being done by financial institutions and by governments. Our focus is certainly on scale because that's a significant issue that we're facing, and how can innovation help us reach that scale. So just as a caveat, I'd like to mention that our focus is primarily on low-income populations. Even though I understand that financial literacy is something that all of us need, our focus has been specifically on that population. So just a few things to start things off. Doing some research prior to the conference, I found out some interesting information. 48% of adults in Russia have accounts at a formal financial institution, but only 11% use it to save. Why are people here saving their money in cash and or foreign currency and not in banks? And what are the goals in terms of short terms and the dreams in terms of the long term of youth in Russia? And do they vary depending on geography or income? I think these are important questions when analyzing the specific case of Russia. As another caveat, even though I come from Colombia now, I'm originally from Serbia. So bullet point number 2, that was my family, and that still is to a certain extent my family. We save our money in dinars that we receive, the local currency, and then euros, and then dollars, because you never really know how each of them will behave. So why aren't we using banks? And there's an important question there about whether it's the tools and the products or whether it's our knowledge or lack thereof that's preventing us. I believe that financial literacy is actually a stepping stone towards the bigger goal, which I believe is financial inclusion. It's having the products and services that banks can provide really work to the advantage of the consumer. And so I asked the question, where do we focus our efforts? On technology, I guess. So should we focus our efforts on supply or demand or regulation, perhaps? The big question that we often wrestle is, do people need financial literacy or do they just need better products? And certainly, I think here in Russia, you have a lot of banks. Just driving over from the airport, there's banks all over the place. But in Latin America, I have to tell you that products and services available for low-income populations that meet their needs are few and far between. So I ask the question again, if so many people, relatively speaking, have access to bank accounts, what are they using them for? Why aren't they using them for savings? And is this a question of, are we lacking financial literacy or are we lacking the proper products? And I think particularly focusing on low-income populations, you'd be surprised at people who earn $1.25 a day, they save. Even if they save by eating half a loaf of bread today and saving the other half for tomorrow, that's still saving. And a poor person who doesn't save is dead. Because you need to be able to manage your money and your scarce resources, which can vary in terms of one day you receive more money, the other day you receive less or no money. So managing that is incredibly important. So I think the context is very important. If you think about certainly these scenes, this is a small entrepreneurial shop that I came across in South Africa, and certainly the context is important when you think about, are we talking about financial literacy in Moscow? Are we talking about urban centers, St. Petersburg? Are we talking about very rural regions that may not have access to these services? And then, let me see. So I'll just keep clicking until they keep popping up. So in terms of how we approach financial inclusion, we really take an interdisciplinary approach. I think that it's important that we take into consideration not just finance and economics, because I think a lot of this is theory-based, and certainly in your education system, I'm sure as it's similar to my Serbian education system, there's a lack of skills-based training. So what can we learn from the different policies, the different disciplines that can help us when we're designing programs? We've performed some semiotic studies. They look at, as was mentioned earlier today, some of the coding that we use in terms of words and images. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but why is it that when we're advertising credit and loans, we say, this is going to change your life? Your life is going to be so much better when you have this loan. And yet when we talk about savings or retirement or pension funds, it's always slow language, little by little you can make it. We're not making savings sexy, and we need to, because otherwise we can't get the youth engaged. We also use ethnographic studies, which are an anthropological tool where we really look at the behaviors, the household behaviors of the people that we're trying to reach, what their needs are, how they behave, and I think that that's really important when you're trying to design a program. User-centric design, know your client. If you're proposing an internet-based program for an octogenarian, for an 80-year-old, you may not get the best results. If you're focusing an in-person education program where there's huge transportation barriers, again, it could be difficult. There's a lot of interesting studies that are showing up about self-control mechanisms. There's a lot of people that say, I need for the product in itself to allow me to save, to make it easier for me to save, to make it easier for me to budget my money. I need systems that safeguard part of my savings that come in, whether it's whether it's income that's coming in from a job or whatever, but something that really facilitates this process. And if you think about what the government was doing and why there's such an emphasis on social, on pension funds, and the government should be taking care of us, and that was the old system, it was easier. If it's easier, we don't even notice it, and we don't feel it as much. So what sort of products could be designed that can facilitate this process for us? And also, what does it mean for me? When we talk about financial education, I mean, here's a question. Please raise your hand if you know how to drive a car. Okay, interesting. All right. So please raise your hand if you think you know how to drive a car but have never actually driven one, and it's just because you sat in on a lecture and somebody told you how to drive a car or you read a book about it. Yeah, you don't learn how to drive a car by reading a book. You learn how to drive a car by getting behind the wheel and driving that car. So if you don't see how this education is applicable to your life, or if you don't have access to a financial product that will allow you to practice and to use that, all the financial education in the world isn't going to help you very much. And then for us, it's very important working with governments because we're formally a nonprofit organization, and so our reach is quite limited. So we do the design, and then the governments do the scale-up because they're the ones that really can access so many people. So just to give you a few very quick examples, and I know that these don't apply directly to the Russian case, but they can give you an idea of how to sort of start thinking outside of the box. So why is research important? In Ecuador, we found that it was difficult to get people to save in the formal financial institutions because they felt that they were losing control of their money. They were used to counting their money and seeing it and feeling it. And so we came up with a system of where they would save their money and then they would receive a small little coin that represented the amount of money that they had in their account. So they could count it at any moment and then have it visible to them. And so doing your research beforehand and understanding what the barriers are is incredibly important. What channels are we using? This is actually a very interesting thing. We're designing right now a social marketing mass media campaign, and this is actually one of the ways to reach people in the very rural areas. A guy goes around and he speaks into a microphone and he bikes around the city square calling people to come to an event or to listen to a radio program. And so you need to understand what are the channels that people are using, whether it's radio, what hour are they using it at, what are they listening to. And in a certain sense, I feel that sometimes we try to design these really cool programs and we think we're really innovative and exciting. But if we're designing a financial education comic book, for example, why not work with Marvel Comics? that do Spider-Man, which is really cool and exciting for the kids, rather than for me to sit down and pencil out what I think is an exciting comic book, because I don't know, because I'm not an expert in comics, but somebody else is. And the same with soap operas. There's a wonderful case from South Africa called Scandal. The reason why it was very successful is actually because a lot of people were already watching it, and they just incorporated financial literacy as a case study within the soap opera. And then in terms of contents, how are you speaking to the population? How are you creating your messages and designing your messages? I actually run a program which is quite innovative. We're using tablet computers with low-income women living in rural areas, many of whom are actually illiterate, functionally illiterate, completely illiterate. And we're using tablets to in a certain way replace what's being done with in-person training through a different and a unique mechanism. And so we had a lot of really interesting results with the study, and we're currently scaling it up with the government of Colombia and then also entering Brazil. But content design was certainly very important. You need to start simplifying the messages so that people understand them. People are unable to, after a program, define interest, but they're able to understand what interest means and how it affects me. And I think that is so much more important than understanding and knowing how to define the program. And so we're really excited about learning more, and certainly happy to share, and grateful to the City Foundation. They've been great supporters of the work we've been doing. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say context really matters, and Russia is a huge country with significant differences based on geographic regions, based on age groups, and certainly we've talked today about all the different ways in which you can segment your target audience. So you need to understand and know where they're coming from, what their needs are, and how to focus your work on them, applying user-centric design, making the contents fun and relevant to them. I recommend also, if you can, integrate technology to scale up, because that can really help decrease costs. Don't forget to measure your results. I know we had a great panel today, but very important in terms of understanding what works. And really, there's never a one-size-fits-all solution. So I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards, and thank you very much for your attention.